The moment that Japanese baseball has been dreading has finally arrived. In a packed and suffocatingly tense press conference that will go down as one of the most dramatic and emotionally devastating moments in the entire history of Japanese baseball, the NPB chairman stepped up to the podium and made the official announcement that has shaken the sport to its absolute foundation. For Samurai Japan, players have been suspended indefinitely, their careers frozen in place with no clear end in sight and no guarantee that they will ever return to the field wearing the colors of Japan again. But it was what happened next that truly broke the hearts of everyone watching. Hiroki Obata, the man who gave everything he had to Samurai Japan, stood before the cameras with tears streaming down his face and received a punishment so severe and so final that even his harshest critics fell silent in the face of its devastating weight. And then, in the hours that followed this extraordinary press conference, 2 emails arrived. 2 emails from Shohei Ohtani himself. 2 emails that have sent the entire baseball world into a state of complete shock and confusion, with one question on absolutely everybody's lips. Is Shohei serious? This is the moment that changes everything for Japanese baseball. Today we are going to take you inside every detail of what happened at that final meeting, what the NPB chairman said that left the room in stunned silence, why 4 players now face an indefinite suspension that has effectively frozen their careers, what Obata said through his tears at that devastating press conference, and what those 2 emails from Ohtani truly mean for the future of Samurai Japan and the World Baseball Classic. For weeks, tension had been building within the NPB at a level that those inside the organization described as almost unbearable. The problems surrounding Samurai Japan had been allowed to simmer and grow for far too long, and everyone who was paying close attention knew that a reckoning was coming. What nobody fully anticipated was just how final, how severe, and how emotionally devastating that reckoning would ultimately be. The final meeting was called with very little advance notice, which immediately signaled to those within the organization that something of extraordinary significance was about to happen. NPB officials do not call emergency final meetings on short notice for minor matters. When word spread that the chairman himself would be presiding over the gathering, the atmosphere within the organization shifted immediately from anxious anticipation to genuine dread. Those who attended the meeting described the atmosphere inside the room as unlike anything they had ever experienced in their years of involvement with Japanese baseball. The chairman entered the room with a gravity and a solemnity that immediately made clear to everyone present that what was about to be announced would be historic. There were no pleasantries, no opening remarks, no attempts to soften what was coming. The chairman went directly to the matter at hand with a directness and a firmness that left absolutely no room for hope or misinterpretation. The meeting had been called to address the full and complete findings of an extensive internal investigation that the NPB had been conducting quietly but thoroughly over the preceding weeks. The investigation had examined every aspect of the incidents that had brought Samurai Japan to this point of crisis, reviewing evidence, interviewing witnesses, and consulting with legal and organizational experts to ensure that whatever decisions were reached would be defensible, proportionate, and reflective of the seriousness with which the NPB viewed the situation. When the chairman finally began to speak, the room was so quiet that those present later said they could hear their own heartbeats. Every word he delivered landed with the weight of a hammer blow, and by the time he reached his final announcement, there was not a single person in that room who was not shaken to their core by the magnitude of what they had just heard. The announcement that 4 Samurai Japan players had been suspended indefinitely was delivered by the chairman with a clarity and a finality that made absolutely certain there would be no confusion about what was being decided. These were not temporary suspensions with defined end dates. These were indefinite suspensions, meaning that the careers of 4 men who had dedicated their lives to Japanese baseball were now effectively frozen, placed in a state of complete uncertainty, with no clear path forward and no guarantee that the path forward would ever reopen. The indefinite nature of the suspensions was what struck those present most forcefully. A defined suspension, no matter how long, at least gives a player something to work toward. There is an endpoint, a date on the calendar, a moment when the punishment concludes and the possibility of return begins. An indefinite suspension offers none of that. It leaves a player in a state of permanent uncertainty, unable to plan, unable to prepare, and unable to move forward with any confidence about what their future in the sport might look like. Sources familiar with the details of the investigation have indicated that the violations committed by the 4 players were considered by NPB officials to be of a nature serious enough to warrant this level of extreme and open-ended punishment. The organization made clear through the chairman's announcement that it views the integrity and the reputation of Samurai Japan as non-negotiable values that must be protected at all costs, even when the cost of that protection is the effective freezing of 4 professional careers. The 4 players were not present at the press conference when the announcement was made, but sources close to them say that the news hit each of them with a force that was almost physically overwhelming. These are men who have spent the better part of their lives working toward the goal of representing Japan at the highest level of international baseball competition. To have that goal taken away indefinitely, with no clear indication of when or whether it might ever be restored, is a blow of almost incomprehensible magnitude. For Japanese baseball fans, the news of the 4 indefinite suspensions was deeply painful to absorb. Many of these players had been fan favorites, players whose names and faces were familiar and beloved throughout the country. Watching their careers be frozen in this way, knowing that the games they might have played and the moments they might have created will now never come to pass, was a source of genuine grief for millions of people who had followed and supported them throughout their careers. But as devastating as the announcement of the 4 indefinite suspensions was, it was what happened next that truly broke the hearts of everyone watching. When Hiroki Ibata stepped up to the podium at the press conference, the room changed in an instant. The formal and procedural atmosphere that had characterized the chairman's announcement gave way to something far more raw and far more human. And when Ibata began to speak, and the tears came, there was not a dry eye in the room. Ibata had been informed of his punishment prior to the press conference, giving him time to compose himself before facing the cameras. But composure, it turned out, was simply beyond what the situation allowed. As he stood before the assembled media and began to speak about what had happened and what the NPB had decided, the emotion that he had been carrying through weeks of crisis and uncertainty finally broke through in a way that he could not control and did not try to hide. The punishment that the NPB has handed down to Ibata has been described by multiple sources within the organization as the harshest individual punishment in the history of Japanese baseball. It goes beyond anything that has been imposed on any manager, coach, or official in the sport's long and storied history in Japan. The details of the specific penalties involved have not yet been fully disclosed, but those familiar with the decision have confirmed that it includes a permanent ban from any managerial or coaching role within the NPB and a complete severance of all official ties with Samurai Japan for the remainder of his lifetime. For a man who dedicated the most important years of his professional life to Japanese baseball, who poured his heart and his energy and his passion into building Samurai Japan into a team that the entire country could be proud of, this punishment represents a loss that goes far beyond the professional. It is a loss of identity, of purpose, and of the deep and meaningful connection to the sport that has defined who he is as a person for as long as anyone who knows him can remember. As the tears fell and Ibata struggled to find his words, those watching could see clearly that this was not a man performing grief for the cameras. This was genuine, unfiltered human pain. The kind of pain that comes from watching something you built and loved and sacrificed for collapse completely, and from knowing that your own actions, whatever they may have been, played a role in bringing it to this point. It was one of the most powerful and most heartbreaking moments that Japanese baseball has ever produced. And the images of Ibata standing at that podium with tears on his face will remain with everyone who witnessed them for the rest of their lives. And then came the emails. In the hours following the press conference, as the Japanese baseball world was still reeling from the weight of everything that had been announced, word began to spread that 2 emails had been sent by Shohei Ohtani to NPB officials. 2 emails from the most famous and most influential Japanese baseball player on the planet, sent at a moment when the entire organization was at its most vulnerable and its most uncertain. 2 emails whose contents have ignited a debate across the entire baseball world that shows absolutely no signs of slowing down. The first email, according to sources familiar with its contents, was sent by Ohtani in the immediate aftermath of the press conference. In it, Ohtani expressed his deep shock and profound sadness at the events that had unfolded. He spoke about his personal connection to several of the suspended players and to Ibata himself, and he made clear that the punishment handed down, particularly the indefinite suspension of 4 players and the lifetime ban imposed on Ibata, struck him as extraordinarily severe. He asked NPB officials directly, and without ambiguity whether there was any possibility of reconsideration, and he made clear that he was prepared to be personally involved in any process that might lead to a more measured and constructive resolution. The second email arrived several hours later, and it was the contents of this second message that have truly set the baseball world on fire. Sources describe the tone of the second email as markedly different from the first. Where the first email was measured and diplomatic, the second was more direct, more urgent, and more personal. In it, Ohtani made a series of statements about his own relationship with Samurai Japan and the WBC going forward that have left NPB officials and baseball observers genuinely uncertain about what his intentions truly are. The specific language of the second email has not been fully disclosed, but the portions that have been shared with sources familiar with the situation have been enough to generate the question that is now on absolutely everybody's lips. Is Shohei serious? Is the most important player in Japanese baseball genuinely considering the full consequences of what he has written? And if so, what does that mean for the future of Samurai Japan, the WBC, and the entire landscape of Japanese baseball at the international level? Those close to Ohtani say that he is not someone who sends emails or makes statements carelessly. He is known throughout the baseball world for his precision, his thoughtfulness, and his deep awareness of the impact that his words and actions carry. When Ohtani writes something in an official communication to NPB leadership, he means every single word. And that is precisely what makes the contents of those two emails so significant and so deeply unsettling for everyone with a stake in the future of Japanese baseball. The NPB now finds itself in the most difficult and most consequential position it has occupied in its entire history. The chairman's announcements have been made, the punishments have been handed down, and the organization has taken a firm and uncompromising public stance on the issues that brought Samurai Japan to this point of crisis. But the arrival of Ohtani's two emails has introduced a level of complexity and uncertainty that threatens to undermine everything the NPB was trying to achieve through its decisive action. If Ohtani's emails contain what sources suggest they contain, the NPB is now faced with a choice of almost impossible difficulty. On one hand, backing down from the punishments it has just announced would send a deeply damaging message about the organization's authority, its consistency, and its willingness to hold firm on matters of principle even when faced with pressure from powerful and influential figures. On the other hand, ignoring or dismissing the concerns raised by the most important player in Japanese baseball and potentially losing his involvement with Samurai Japan and the WBC would be a catastrophic outcome that could have consequences for Japanese baseball that last for years or even decades. The NPB chairman and his senior officials are now engaged in urgent internal discussions about how to respond to Ohtani's emails in a way that is both principled and practical. They are consulting with legal advisors, communication experts, and senior figures within the Japanese baseball community to try to find a path through this extraordinary situation that protects the integrity of the organization while also acknowledging the very real and very significant concerns that Ohtani has raised. Japanese baseball has never faced a moment quite like this one. The final meeting, the chairman's devastating announcements, the 4 indefinite suspensions, Ibata's tears, and Ohtani's 2 extraordinary emails have combined to create a crisis of a scale and complexity that has no clear precedent in the history of the sport. The entire baseball world is now watching and waiting to see how this situation resolves itself, and the stakes could not possibly be higher. For the 4 suspended players, for Ibata, for the NPB, and for Ohtani himself, the coming days and weeks will be absolutely decisive. Decisions will be made, responses will be given, and the future direction of Japanese baseball will begin to take shape in ways that will be felt for many years to come. One thing is absolutely certain in the middle of all this uncertainty. Japanese baseball will never be quite the same after this moment. The question now is whether what emerges from this crisis will be something stronger, healthier, and more worthy of the passion and the pride that millions of Japanese baseball fans invest in the sport they love so deeply. We will be here to bring you every update as this story continues to develop. Thank you for watching. Tell us in the comments what you think about Ohtani's 2 emails and whether you believe the NPB made the right decisions today. If you want to stay on top of every development in this extraordinary story, please subscribe to our channel and never miss a single update.